Welcome to the STARS program, seniors taking active roles in society. And now, here's your host, ANITA FINLEY.
Good morning, everybody. Well, we have an exciting show for everyone today. I don't know if it's raining where you are, but we certainly have had a lot of rain here. But the most important thing is we have our star guest, and of course, it's Darwin Porter, and he's calling in from Staten Island. Good morning.
Good morning to you, ANITA.
Good morning to you too. And I know that you've been having, I guess, pretty hot weather up there in New York, right?
Yes, but we're also living in a rainforest, and some of my big trees have grown 8 feet. so it's been a great summer. I don't want it to end though. I love summers, but
yeah, I
anyway.
know. But it's hot. So Darwin, you're
updates.
Well, right. So come on, there's so much going on out there. I need you.
Okay. Well, first, there've been quite a lot happening. I want to talk about a journalistic coup that you and I had on a broadcast in 2012.
Oh.
And, we're going back here. It was on a figure called Scotty Bowers, who is now 95 years old. But since our broadcast, he wrote a book called Full Service, My Adventures in Hollywood and the Secret Sex Lives of the Stars. And it became a New York Times bestseller and has provoked lots of commentary. And now a director, Matt Turner, is coming out with a new documentary, Scotty and the Secret History of Hollywood. Now, the New York Times, which reviews only a scattering of books, devoted a big Friday story to him when the book came out, and then a big feature in the Sunday book review. And now they've gotten a preview of the movie and put it on the front page of their arts page, which means that Scotty is going to get a lot of publicity. Most writers would dream for that kind of publicity. And as I said, he was born in 1923. He's still going strong. And the shocking thing about all this book and Revelations is that it virtually challenges a great deal of the books of stars, particularly the era, the 1940s, 50s, and 60s, even up to the 70s. Much of what the public was fed, and you may know that already, was image. It was the image created on the screen, but the stars also had to create images to live off the screen, although it had their off-screen image had little to do with what was going on behind the scenes.
Isn't that true, Darwin, though, all with everybody? It's all different, right? It's not what they are on the screen.
Well, see, it's different now in the sense that John F. Kennedy got through his presidency without major revelations. Most people heard that he'd had an affair with Marilyn Monroe, but that didn't come out. That wasn't really published by the time of his assassination. And whereas two later presidents, Bill Clinton and Donald Trump, are widely publicized. New affairs kept popping up all the time and still do. There are more to come. So it's a new day out there and a new day of reporting. But Scotty sort of, let me first bring you up to date. He arrived, he got out, he had fought in the Battle of Iwo Jima. He was a handsome, strapping ex-Marine, and he arrived in Hollywood with his good looks and midnight cowboy endowment, and he got a job at a gas station. And this began his career. And the gas station used to stand on Hollywood Boulevard. I passed it many times. There were just two pumps out front. But one day, Walter Pidgeon drove up. Now, Walter Pidgeon was a Canadian who became very famous during World War II. You know, in fact, one of the biggest hits was the 1942 Mrs. Miniver with Greer Garth.
I remembered that. Boy, am I old.
Yeah. And so Walter Pidgeon asked Scotty, when do you get off from work? And he said, 10 o'clock tonight. And Walter Pidgeon said, I'll be by to take you over to my home. And it's a hot day and you can go for a swim and don't bother to bring a bathing suit. And thus began Scotty's career as, well, a stud to the stars. And Walter Pidgeon spread the news about Scotty, and soon his phone was ringing, and he launched into a major career. Now, he's often known as a pimp, but to tell you the truth, Scotty only charged for his own services. He rounded up young men and later young women for a lot of stars who wanted to lead secret lives. Although he mostly specialized in ex-Marines, many were available for work because in 1945, millions of servicemen came home from the war, and the factories were still turning out war material, and they hadn't yet converted to domestic products and manufacturing. So there was massive unemployment at first. So what was funny, there were only 2 pumps there, but then Scotty eventually had 20 Marines there to service
That's
those
hysterical.
2 pumps. And then one of his next customers was Cary Grant, who invited him to come by and visit him. He was staying at behind the Beverly Hills Hotel in a bungalow with his longtime lover, Randolph Scott. I'm sure you remember him from the movies.
Yes, I do. He was tall, lean, thin, you know.
Yes, and Cary Grant and Scott used to live together in the 30s, and they had continued their relationship for a very long time. So he started moving up in the world. And then one day, Desi Arnaz pulled up, and he said, I hear you supply men, but I like girls, so why don't you include some beautiful young... He said, there are a lot of would-be actresses who came to Hollywood, and they never got work, so you must be able to recruit a lot of these young women. And so he did. So Scotty started catering to all tastes. You will not believe the names that have popped in. The implication is that much of the biographies of these stars written long ago have nothing to do with their private lives. In fact, it was estimated that many of the books of biographies are fantasies. Now, fortunately, that's not my case, because I heard about Scotty when I was 21, and the bureau chief of the Miami Herald, I was a great friend, as you know, of Tennessee Williams, and one day he asked me to type up a 40-page outline, and he had started to write the story of Scotty Bowers, and it was amazingly tantalizing. Later on, Scotty asked him to burn it and tear it up. And then Gore Vidal came down, and he filled me in and told me the complete story. So when I arrived in Hollywood, I knew about this notorious Scotty. I'll just give you one thing. I wrote a book on Katharine Hepburn, and thank God my story, it was widely denounced at the time, but now it's been on The View, it's been in the New York Times. I mean, the story is that Katharine Hepburn was a lesbian, and everybody seemed to know it, but it didn't make the paper. And they said, in most accounts and most books, Spencer Tracy and Katharine Hepburn have been written about a lot. It's a bit of a fantasy. Someone did I think, 1,000-page book on Spencer Tracy and left out the fact that he was gay. So Katharine Hepburn and Spencer Tracy represented the ultimate image makers. I was a friend of their George Cukor, the famous director, and Spencer Tracy lived in a cottage on his lot. And I learned a lot about Spencer Tracy and Katharine Hepburn, which I used in my book. And Scotty ultimately said he knew Hepburn over a 50-year period and supplied 150 women to her. And this has been widely reported. Now, people say, "Oh, Scotty, 150 women." He said, "Now wait a minute. I did this for 50 years.
Right.
That represents 3 a year."
That's all.
So
right?
he said, "That's not 3 a year. That's not." And then he also wrote of his affair with Spencer Tracy. But the most shocking thing was the first time he visited Tracy for a little intimacy, Tracy told him, he says, "I hate Katharine Hepburn. She's a vicious, mean woman. She puts me down all the time. She holds me in utter contempt." But he said, "We got this image to maintain, and we both have to use the image to protect our privacy." So that just blew. There goes all those books on Katharine Hepburn. Now, a lot of people have challenged the authenticity of Scotty, but very few people in Hollywood. I mean, the famous director John Schlesinger, Gore Vidal, just one person after another have said Scotty is they've never known Scotty to lie. He's got an enormous endorsement. And indeed, when I arrived in Hollywood, it was common knowledge. But those things didn't make the press then. The only thing is, I feel safe that the validity of my biographies are still holding true because nothing has come up to challenge what I wrote. And I was very fortunate to get in on it at a very young age. And so I'm not being embarrassed today by all these revelations being published in the New York Times and ultimately other newspapers. I hope the film comes to your area. It's called Scotty and the Secret History of Hollywood because you might want to go see it.
Okay, but I have to ask you, let's go back to Spencer Tracy. I thought that, and maybe then this wasn't true, that the reason he couldn't get divorced was because he was Catholic or something like that. That's not true, right?
No.
Oh, see?
They had a death, but he also found it very convenient to stay in that marriage. And his wife was willing to go through with it, and I'm sure she eventually found out that the affair with Hepburn was for show. In fact, I will bring up. This might be a good lead-in to bring up the biggest image-making show in history, the Duke and Duchess of Windsor.
Right.
Talk about name-dropping. And, of course, in that sentimental speech, the Duke of Windsor said, "I'm giving up the throne." Now, the throne in that time, he was the Emperor of India, and that was still intact, the great British Empire. So he was giving up a lot, not just the throne of England.
And that wasn't true, though? He wasn't really in love with her, and that's not true?
Well, here is the story.
Okay.
He liked boys, and she liked girls. And in fact, toward the end of their life, I heard they weren't even speaking to each other. But Scotty had a Cecil Beaton, who was a famous. He did the costumes for My Fair Lady, and he was a famous photographer. He said, "The Duke and Duchess have heard about you, and they would like to meet you." And they were staying at a bungalow at the Beverly Hills Hotel. So Scotty went to meet them, and there were 2 other people there who were in on the scene. And he said, "This is Edward." Cecil said, "This is Edward." Scotty said, "May I call you Eddie?"
That's too much.
Apparently, they liked each other very much because they had a little guest room, and Edward took King, then Duke, took Scotty into the back room for a little action.
My gosh.
They became great friends on and off. They even flew to like Florida, Palm Beach, and it also turned out that the Duchess liked young girls, but only brunettes, never a blonde. And so he ended up, through that connection, supplying lovers. They only wanted them for one time. They never did a repeat. And this has been confirmed now. Of course, in the case of the Duke and Duchess, there have been books written about them that are more revealing, unlike the Spencer Tracy, Katharine Hepburn. The people got on to the Duke and Duchess. So what turned out to be the greatest royal affair of all time was actually a cover-up. And this has been authenticated by many sources. And I found that one of the more shocking aspects. And through Cooker, Scotty met Vivian Leigh. And she was in Hollywood making Tennessee Williams a streetcar named Desire. I'm sure you saw it.
Of course. Oh, my goodness, yes.
With Marlon Brando.
Oh, absolutely. Oh, my gosh.
She won her second Oscar. And, excuse me this morning. It's a little early for me here. I'm strangling on my coffee.
It's not too early for you.
The Vice Squad began to patrol that filling station. So Scotty became, for 60 years, a bartender at all the Hollywood parties. And that's where he started making all of his connections. And Vivian Leigh came to stay with Cooker, and she'd been flirting with Scotty during the course of the evening. And she was staying in the cottage in back. And they were kissy-kissy and everything goodbye. And then on the way out, she came up to Scotty and told him where she was staying. And she said, "Get your arse back here in an hour." And he said, Vivian was a wonderful lover. And at the time, Larry Olivier was away making a picture. So he, and then he also said he supplied lovers, male lovers to Vivian. The one thing about her, they didn't call it that then, she had bipolar disorder. And my book I wrote a book called Damn You, Scarlett O'Hara.
Right.
And fortunately I got it. There's nothing that has been revealed about her later that disqualified my book. So I will not be in the category of books on Vivian Leigh that did not tell the truth. So I feel justified a little bit by that. I escaped the bullet.
But I want to go back to the royal family a second. So why did he give it up then, if that's all true? So you mean he couldn't fool around here if he were the king, is that why?
Well, you had to be very discreet. Do you know what kind of scandal that was? Could you imagine the headlines?
Yeah,
I mean, see, by the time Nixon and Watergate came along, people really started to move in on stories, and also stories about stars. I mean, every day there's a new revelation today, but you lived through that era that I did.
Sure.
We were very careful what could be written about and what was not said, just spoken. So there's been a great revisitation of all these myths that we were fed about people. That's no longer, well, it could be going on in some cases. I mean, people are still living private lives, but if you are doing biography today, you've got to, you don't want to be caught red-faced coming out with with a story. Where you write a 1,000-page book and miss the story. I mean,
Okay, so I have a
Russ.
question. Wait. So in all your years of understanding, are there any couples who are totally in love with each other and don't fool around and are straight like this?
Of course there are. Sid Charisse and Tony Martin. In fact, I wrote a column in the BoomerTimes about there are some couples, but you know, if you're a movie star, you get temptations every day. I mean, there could be some love affair, Charles Boyer and his wife, but you get there are a lot of temptations thrown in, and they're often away on location. Ronald Reagan said that I developed leading lady-itis, meaning I fall in love with my female co-star, but the romance is over at the end of the movie, and that happens so very often. But I have to get in one more tantalizing thing. I mean, I could go on and on about this. I mean, there are many stories. Like, he introduced Carol Channing to Charles Lowe, who became her manager. They were married for 42 years before they got a divorce. And Carol Channing told him, Charles went to bed with me one time during my 42 years of marriage.
Really?
Wow. I know you remember Raymond Burr, who played
yes.
Perry May. There was a love. He introduced him to Bob Benavides, and they lasted for 33 years. I had dinner with them one night in the Azores, where they had a home, and it lasted for 33 years, so there's some romance there. Cole Porter. I love Cole Porter's music. He was sort of insatiable. He wanted 15 to 20 Marines in one night. Aha. I mean, it's been known to happen, but, and while Edith Piaf, one of my favorite singers, was in Hollywood, he had appearing at the Macumba, he had an affair with her every night, although he was monstrously tall and she was just little 4 feet something. Somehow they fitted together, but I think I have time for.
Yeah, you do. You're amazing. If you want to just keep going, you can. I mean, this is too beautiful. I just love this.
Yeah, he got invited by someone he did not identify, Scotty now, just known as Fred, and he had a beautiful home down in La Jolla in California. And he said, I've got 2 friends coming in for the weekend, and I'd like you to come down and be my companion. And Scotty agreed and drove a beautiful home. And he said then later on, about 10 o'clock, this car pulled up, and he looked out the window, and a chauffeur got out, and a sort of shorter, squatty man got out of the back, and he said he looked familiar. And then the chauffeur came in, and he'd taken off his jacket, and he had a gun strapped to his shoulder. And the man who looked familiar was introduced as John. Well, his full name was John Edgar Hoover.
Oh, yes. That's...
And then, now, you know I wrote a book on Hoover.
Yes.
But then it was obvious that it was going to be a weekend that the chauffeur, who was actually an FBI agent, and Hoover were going to share a room, and Fred and Scotty. But Scotty opened this wardrobe, and it was filled with women's dresses.
Whoa.
So for the rest of the weekend, John and Fred dressed as women. Now, it is widely known and accepted today that Hoover was a cross-dresser. Can I tell you real quick one more thing?
Oh, please. I'm just, I'm mesmerized with all this.
My former director and TV, Stanley Haggart, was dating Anne Bancroft and was going to marry her before Mel Brooks came on the scene. And she invited us over for dinner. And her guest that night at her townhouse in Greenwich Village was Ethel Merman. And Ethel had a few drinks and was really, I think she didn't know there would be that Darwin Porter there, later using material. And, she told us this wonderful story. She was in fact, the best woman friend of J. Edgar Hoover. And she said, I was the one who bought his gowns because J. Edgar Hoover couldn't go into a store and buy a dress shop and buy gowns for you.
So, Darwin, let me ask you a question. Would you like to go on for the next half hour? This is so interesting. Do you have enough material you could do it?
Oh, honey, we could talk.
Oh, honey. Okay, so what we're going to do, this is what we're going to do. Darwin, we'll take a break right now so you can get some coffee. Then just come right back, okay? So you get a breather.
Okay.
All right.
Okay, fine.
So just hold on then. Go do what you have to do, and we'll bring you right back, okay? Just go. Okay, so while he goes and he gets a fresh breath of whatever he needs, we're going to have him come back. We had a wonderful expo. For those of you who listen, so many of you say that you hear us every Saturday morning. We certainly do appreciate that you came. It was not to be believed. At the end, well, actually, we had the Ziegfeld Folly ladies, 3 of them, walk around. They were absolutely gorgeous. We're going to have a show next January where they'll be performing. But we had the Boomer Boys, these 3 gorgeous men who danced with some of the women. It was just lovely. And we had a packed house. Thank you, exhibitors, if you're listening. Thank you, all the crowd who came. And it was just probably our very best one. So we're really in the mood now. We can't wait for January. And we thank you so much. And okay, maybe if Darwin's back, let's let him do the next half hour. It's just fascinating. We're so lucky to have Darwin Porter, who calls in from Staten Island. He is probably the most famous celebrity writer. He's written probably more than 25 books, but he is so special, and I feel so blessed.
50.
Here he is. Okay, kiddo,
50.
keep going.
25 I could do in my sleep.
I know that. And what are you working at? Let's just take 1 second. What's the book you're working on now? Tell everybody.
Well, okay, I can certainly talk about that. I have just finished a book on Hugh Hefner called Empire of Skin, and it's
Great
my
name.
Halloween gift to the world.
Oh boy!
and I certainly, it was one of the hardest books I've ever done because most people just have an image of him, smoking the pipe and wearing the satin smoking jacket and black silk pajamas and no underwear and lots of bunnies. But in the larger context, this was a major cultural hero. If there's anyone, and I know many people listening to us were born and growing up in the 50s, that was a very repressive era. I mean, the goal was to get married, have move to the suburbs and have 3 kids, or maybe 2 kids, and lead a very conventional life. Gregory Peck made a movie about that kind of restraint of the era called The Man in the Gray Flannel Suit.
Yes.
But then now Hefner started out in that era, but then he got married and he had 2 children, David and Christy. Christy later took over the Playboy empire, and for a loan from his mother for $500, he got that nude calendar picture of Marilyn Monroe, and she was just on the dawn of becoming really famous. And for $500, so he put her on the cover, and then the nude calendar. Well, he was made. The magazine became a sensation. He had worked for Esquire and asked for a $5 raise, and they refused to give it to him. And the editor of Esquire said that was the biggest mistake I ever made in my life. But the thing about Hugh Hefner is, he is called the father of the sexual revolution. but he was much larger figure than I had ever realized. I mean, for example, he launched the careers of many African American entertainers. He was a great believer in civil rights. He wanted to get rid of laws that made homosexuality illegal, and he often paid out money from his own pocket. For example, he heard that a man in West Virginia was put in jail for 3 years because he allowed a straight woman to perform fellatio on him. He was thrown in jail for that.
Amazing.
I mean, it was a different time.
Yeah.
And so the saga of Hugh Hefner, I think, is also a saga of America in the latter part of the 20th century and how we changed as a nation and the changes that were brought into his own life. So I found it, and I've been very fortunate. I just found out that Warner Brothers has taken over the script, a movie script. So I'm sort of timing my book to come out at the time of the movie, which always helps, which means that, he'll be on TV again and all in the newspapers. And Brett Ratner, the director, had been doing the movie, and in pre-production, he was taken off because all these charges of sexual harassment were leveled against Brett. But now Warner's has picked it up. It's not known who will play Hugh Hefner. Of course, they'll be casting him as a younger man, so I don't have a clue who can play you. Maybe you do, but I don't.
Wait, so are they using your information? That's what you're saying? That you're working with them? No?
No, they have never seen my book.
Oh, my.
I will tell you a secret, though. Unknown that I'm doing this book, a call came in. You're a friend, a great friend of our publisher and my publisher, Danforth Prince.
Yes.
And it was from Playboy.
Really?
And they want to do a centerfold here at the house. So Danforth chose not to tell them that we're also. Wasn't that a coincidence?
Yes, very much so. And so you're going to do it?
Of course.
Of course you are. Oh, that's wild.
I think it's also great for my book.
Of course this is great. Well, wait a minute. So I am so thrilled about this. And, it's interesting that you started talking about this. So I get the feeling that he's a hero to you, big time.
Well, yes, he was, because I have always, in fact, you and I did a program on that. I have always been against censorship.
Of course.
And the censorship back, for example, let me give you just a quick example. 5 of us I was being the young one, on the Miami Herald, were invited to go and visit Elizabeth Taylor. And we interviewed her the woman's page was giving a view or something, and I was giving a young person's view of Taylor, the goddess. And at one point I wrote in my copy that she pulled off her clothes in her dressing room and changed. Now, that is very common. I've been in many dressing rooms. Stars just routinely pull off their clothes in front of you. And, they're so used to stripping down, I guess, backstage. I put that in the copy. And the editor took it out like, you can't write that. Well, considering what has been written about Dame Elizabeth, that would be the most modest thing you could say about her. So anyway, now, of course, without missing a beat, I have a new book that I've obligated to do now, and I'm into it, and it's Kirk Douglas. The title is More is Never Enough. And now, Kirk Douglas is 102 years old, and he has suffered a stroke. He's in sort of bad condition. But he is the oldest reigning male star of the Golden Age. Mm. You know, someone had to outlive everybody else, right?
Yep.
Well, it was Kirk. And on the female side, as I think I did a column for the BoomerTimes, it's Olivia de Havilland.
Yep.
For Forever Melanie and Gone with the Wind. And they both are the same age. They were born in, 19, that would make them, 1916, I guess. Yeah, 1960. And they're surviving, and I wish both of them well.
But wait a minute, before I let you get off that, but his son, Michael, for heaven's sakes, and isn't that unusual when you get a father and son who are so powerful and so, popular and have done so well? I love,
yes.
I think that's great.
Usually, there have been many sons who've tried to emulate the father, and they often fail.
Yeah.
I mean, for example, Schwarzenegger's son is trying to break into the movies, and Gregory Peck's son, they're good-looking, handsome men, but somehow they've got a long road to hoe. And John Drew Barrymore got a few roles, but he could never live up to the legendary John Barrymore, Hamlet himself, And so usually it doesn't work, but in the case of Kirk Douglas, he had 4 sons, and Michael has succeeded.
Oh, yes.
And, he's married to Catherine
yes.
Jones.
Yes.
But now the fascinating thing Kirk Douglas has been voted among the top 20 male stars of the Golden Age. Now, of all those stars, no one has ever written a book about Kirk Douglas. He wrote his own book, The Ragman's Son. He was born to illiterate Russian Jewish immigrants who fled Russia. There was the pogroms and the persecution of the Jews. And, they were running in horror from the persecution of Jews, and he came to Amsterdam, which was a big man. It was the carpet center of America. It's near, I think it's about 18 miles from Albany, New York. And lo and behold, the father ran into that same Jewish prejudice. A Jew could not work at the carpet factory. Could you imagine such a thing?
No.
So he became a ragman. You know what that, gathering up rags and scrap metal and stuff and selling. So Kirk Douglas has had a fantastic life. He's been involved with some of the most famous women of the 20th century. We're talking Ava Gardner, Lana Turner, Marilyn Monroe. Oh my God. Even more than his best friend, Burt Lancaster. And so it's a great story, and I'm happy to be moving from Mr. Hefner to Mr. Douglas, and I wish him well. And he certainly had his troubles in life, but I think he succeeded just beyond a fact. He truly lived up to the American dream, born in those dire circumstances. He said often as a little boy he had to go out and go to raid someone's gardens. He had uprooted a potato plant, and the Italians lived nearby, and they always grew tomatoes in the backyard. And he would have to sort of steal, and they were apple trees, and so they really scrounged. And then all of a sudden, he got an offer, did some stage work, and he got an offer to come to Hollywood in a leading role and his leading lady was Miss Barbara Stanwyck.
Oh my!
So,
Oh boy!
talk about launching a movie
Right.
career at the top, right?
Well, he was very attractive. That he really had that going, didn't he?
Yes, he did. He was extremely known for that cleft in his chin.
Yeah.
And he made, so I've got some really rich material there. And then I've also there's another movie coming out, and I think I told you, on Judy Garland. And Renee Zellweger will play Miss Garland. I'm sure they will use her own Garland's voice. You can't imitate Judy Garland very well. And so I'm very lucky that two movies are coming out on these subjects, because a movie gives a tremendous exposure to a subject.
I just want to tell everyone, if you're still listening, and I know you are, you're fascinated. This is Darwin Porter. He is the celebrity writer who we're so fortunate to have him for many, many years now. I don't know if it's 10, 15, 20, I don't know, 100 years. He's been writing a column for us in BoomerTimes, and he's on once a month at least on our radio show. And I just sit in awe, and my ears just are flopping all around here listening to him. He is one of the nicest men I have ever met, and he and Danforth Prince, who is publisher and friend, and I'm so appreciative of what you're doing. I love this stuff, and you're an amazing man. You know that.
Well, I often feel I'm too hot to handle.
Too hot. Yeah, that's good. Too hot to handle. Oh, absolutely. And you're just a kid. You're just in your prime now. But so let's get back to what we started at the very beginning, if you want, on some of these amazing facts about people we had no idea. I want to go back to President Roosevelt and his wife, too, because they certainly kept it hidden, didn't they?
Yes, they did. Although it was, you see, these things were not a secret, really, but they were a secret in the sense if you moved in the right circles. I'll give you an example. I used to hang out in a bar near the New York Times. I was once considering trying to work for the New York Times. And so I was meeting all these people, and I figured the best place to get to know them would be the bar where they went after work. And I remember at the time, this was when John F. Kennedy was president. Everybody in there, they often talked about Monroe and Kennedy. So it wasn't appearing in the New York Times or maybe some underground papers. But actually the story of Marilyn Monroe and the Kennedys, I have actually told it because I wrote a story. It's a little more complicated than that. Most people now know she also had an affair with Robert F. Kennedy. In fact, that's been in some books, certainly mine. But you know who got to her first? Joe Kennedy.
Really?
In the
You're
making
kidding.
Marilyn appeared in The Asphalt Jungle in 1950. That was the year she made the famous movie All About Eve with Betty Davis and my dear friend Ann Baxter. And she had a one-night fling that was set up with Joe Kennedy. You know, he had a long record of seducing Hollywood stars, beginning with Gloria Swanson when he was producer in Hollywood. So, I mean, it was a one-night fling. But what was interesting is Papa Kennedy got to know Marilyn's charms before his son. And there's a tail end to this. Teddy, the younger brother, one night he called Marilyn in her home in Brentwood, and Teddy wanted in. So Marilyn, it wasn't just Kennedy. Marilyn got to know Papa Kennedy and the three Kennedy boys. So that's a footnote to the Marilyn Monroe Kennedy saga.
Isn't that so?
And so that's fascinating.
Okay, so now we know that Jackie probably knew. Did Robert Kennedy's wife know, and Teddy, did they all know about this?
I think they had to, because it didn't mean that she, Ethel, from all reports, loved her husband very, very much and was very loyal to him, very faithful to him, but there was just too much gossip going around. And so there was a beginning of, I call it almost our loss of innocence in America when we stopped. Many people attribute to Nixon and Watergate, where the man's image that he was projecting to the American people turned out to be a lie, really. I mean, we found out he was anti-Semitic. I mean, and for heaven's sakes, maybe we knew it, but his preacher, Billy Graham, was also recorded with anti-Semitic remarks. He hated gay people, we knew that, but he also led this very private life, and I think we once did a show on his close friend with a famous Bibi Rebozo.
Yes, yes, right.
Yeah, and their Bibi Rebozo was a homosexual. That was his best friend. So he spent more time with Bibi Rebozo, who had his own room at the White House, than he did with Pat Nixon. So there was a lot about Nixon that has only come out later that was not exposed at the time. But I noticed a beginning shift in the way media covered. They got a little tougher, and they didn't accept images anymore. And, I mean, I just did that book on Debbie Reynolds and Carrie Fisher. Debbie Reynolds and Eddie Fisher were billed as America's sweethearts.
Right.
They were anything but. So we've been fed. Now, one of the major attacks on me, I find people who are not familiar with a lot of things, they attack viciously because you threaten their image. Mm. If you grow up with a certain image of someone, maybe you don't want that myth destroyed. Like, what? There is no Santa Claus?
Yes. It is something that I'm sure that you have had terrible letters written to you besides the lawsuits. Has anyone ever threatened your life?
Yes. Yes. I didn't take it really seriously, but they posted, like Steve McQueen, people posted death threats. And I think it was Danforth Prince who contacted Amazon and asked them to remove those because I don't think they should, they can have fair criticism, but our point of view was to Amazon that you shouldn't have death threats.
No, absolutely. No, you're right.
Really. And Amazon was very kind and they agreed and they removed them. I didn't take them truly seriously. It's like saying, oh God, I could kill him, that kind of thing.
Yeah, right. I understand.
At least I hope that's what it was.
Well, now that you told me all this and the time that you wrote the book on Donald Trump, I don't think that you discussed Putin or any of that in it, did you? I don't remember that.
No, because that wasn't the story. The story that I did,
right? Yeah,
I wanted to do a story that no one had ever done before.
Exactly.
And my book ended 2 months before he won the presidency. Although the last line, he predicts that his next address would be 1600 Pennsylvania Avenue. So in a way, my book ended on an optimistic note. At that time, people thought Miss Hillary Clinton would win.
Yes.
And but what I did is I traced the beginning of the Trump dynasty. And we did a show on that one time because we still have this filmmaker who still wants to do a show, maybe a movie with Johnny Depp about taking all those prostitutes and dried beans and horse flesh to feed Frederick Trump didn't go to mine for gold. He went to feed the stomach and the libido of the miners. I felt that was a fantastic way to begin the Trump dynasty.
Yes, and I know that when you did his book, you were sued, weren't you, or something? You said.
No.
Oh, you weren't.
There were threats and intimidations. We thought that came in from Michael Cohen, who is all in the news today.
Oh,
now.
it was Michael Cohen who did the threats? No
he's
kidding.
No longer. He perhaps would have a change of heart today. Well, he was sort of like, we viewed him as a sort of henchman for Trump.
Ah.
You know, like he would call and try to bully people. And
but he did this to you?
Yes, well, to Denver.
Yeah, but he did.
Yes, and then that alarmed my distributors, and so it caused a lot of upset. But they did that in the beginning. In fact, the man is on TV a lot who was actually sued by Trump. He didn't win. Today, Trump is beyond libel. You can't libel a man like Trump. You know, Hillary has reasons to sue beyond belief, but it's sort of, most lawyers would tell you she's beyond libel. I mean, she's been accused of everything from operating a pedophilic ring to...
Yeah, I know.
You know, and these are all lies, but once you become, I mean, everything in the world's been written by about Hillary and Trump, and they are what they call beyond libel, meaning, well, maybe if you said they were serial killers, that might be a problem. But
okay, so I don't want to lose you before I have a couple more questions. So Jimmy Carter and his wife, weren't they probably a couple that didn't stray?
Yes. In fact, I wrote about, believe it or not, Jimmy Carter in the Hugh Hefner book, because Hugh we call him, almost cost Jimmy Carter the presidency.
Why?
He granted an interview to Jimmy Carter, agreed to give Hefner an interview. And in it, he said, I've always been faithful to my wife, but I've had lust in my heart.
Oh, right. I remember reading that in Playboy. I do remember that.
Yes, and I think he was trying to get away from the fact that he was too sanctimonious, and he was wanting to appear, well, I'm not going to shut down all the strip joints, whatever, when I become president. He was trying to become like I'm one of you or one of the guys, but then his popularity fell drastically, and there was a tense moment. It then rallied right before the November election, but there was a tense moment where the polls showed him the religious right sort of turned against him, and they were his strongest backers. So the Playboy interview didn't help him at all. And then, of course, he squeaked by, but then second time around, he lost to Ronald Reagan, of course. And then
I know we only have a minute, but Harry Truman, I would think that the two of them also would be pretty straight.
Yes, I told you I got to know Harry Truman very briefly.
Yes, in Key West.
Key West. And when he came down for his final vacation, and he let me walk with him. Now, talk about a straight arrow. If there's ever, I think Harry S. Truman, there's no period after the S, he reminded me. When I misspelled his name and put a period, he said the S stands for nothing. They couldn't agree whether Sybil or Sebastian. So it was just that's why he told me I misspelled his name. I alerted the Herald to remove the period after Harry.
Well, with that, I have to thank you. You went the whole hour, and I loved every minute of it, and I'm sure everyone else did. And so we'll talk again. I can't wait for your Hefner book to come out.
Well, we've had a lot of fun and a great show today to you.
Yes, Anita. Thank you, my dear, sweet friend. Bye. Goodbye. Bye.